so striking in this third book, talking about the relation to your father, is that it's so much different to the first two books, because in the first two books you describe him as the violent person, as you just described him, and all the hate and the violence. And in this book, all of a sudden, there's a movement which, because I just been working again on this text of Didier, Retour à Reims, where he also, he says the same what you just mentioned, that you don't know anything about your father. And in the end of the book, which I suggested as a possible ending of my version of it, he says that if he thinks deeply about his father is a result of the violence of the social reality, of the social world. And to me, it seems that in this book, you make the same step. All of a sudden, you understand that all what your father is part of the violence of the social world. And you even say that you love your father. Yeah, well, I can prove it with the text. And it's more complicated. Yeah. So tell us, what's more complicated?
No, because for me, first of all, it was this book, Who Killed My Father, was a different focus than the first book. And on the first book, I was focusing on the violence that my father was applying, that my father was creating and recreating every day towards me as a gay person, towards my mother as a woman, towards other women in general, towards people of color, in the way he was talking against them and insulting them all of the time. And here I talk about mostly, but I talk about both, but I talk mostly about the violence that he suffered from, So for me, there is, of course, no contradiction in it. On the opposite, when you suffer, you can have violent reactions and act in a violent way because of the violence you suffered from, And it's something that we all experience in our lives. You have a bad day at work, or you have someone mean with you at work, or an argument with a friend, and at night you go to your place and you say something mean to the person you love, And as soon as you do it, you realize that you didn't want to say it, You say, like, why did I say something that violent and that stupid? Why was I aggressive towards the person that I love, the man that I love, the woman I love, the person I love? And we all know that. We all know deeply, psychologically and personally, that violence belongs to anyone, So that violence can be but violence belongs to certain people, but not all the time. And that violence can be just like a current that cross your body in spite of you. And every day in our lives, we all experience this kind of thing. The fact that we are crossed by a violence that doesn't belong to us, And that's what I'm saying in Who Killed My Father. I talk about my father, and I say, I talk again about his homophobia and his behavior toward my mother in a quicker way than the other books, but still. And I say also that when my father was drunk, he would cry all the time. And he would say all the time, I don't know why I'm violent, I don't know why, what is this here in my body, I feel that there is something in my body, And that's and it doesn't mean that it's not a problem. It is a problem, and that's why I wrote about it, and that's why I wrote about his homophobia and his racism. But there was something here in his body. I could say the same about my mother, because when I was a child, my mother, she would repeat very often the behavior from my father. She would say things against gay people. She was not particularly tender towards me. And one day, because of a state program, a welfare state program, we got the chance to go on vacation. And it was the first time of my life I went on vacation. I was a teenager. It was the first time I took the train, and I arrived there in vacation. And my father didn't want to come because he said that vacations were for faggots, so he didn't come. And I promise that he said that. And we went on vacation, and my mother was without my father, and suddenly my mother was so different, because she didn't have this violence coming from my father that she was like conducting like an electric current the other days of her lives. She didn't have that violence that was like smashing her and forcing her to reproduce it, as we all do once again. But for these people, for people like my mothers, for people like my family, it's something that happens like every day, And so as soon as my mother was outside of this violent context, she was so different. And the strange thing is that she was talking about it. She was saying, you see how sweet I am a different person. And it means that she was aware that there was something in her, And I always quote this book of Toni Morrison, Beloved. I think we talked about it last year, when this set with a slave, a black slave in the United States, and one day she decides to run away from the place where she's detained, and so she runs with her child. And when the slave owners finds her, she cut the throat of her baby, who only have a few months. And later in the book, Seth, the slave that ran away, she said like, I don't know what was in my body at that moment. I don't know how to call this force, this thing that was crossing me, and that made me do that. Of course, there are some rational reasons. I didn't want my child to be a slave too. I was scared and everything, but there was something. And I think that's what happened with my father. So people who say, oh, before Édouard Louis said that his father was homophobic, and now he says that his father suffered, like, not only this opposition is lazy and stupid, it is a problem or lack of comprehension of the way violence works very often. At least I think that there are people who create violence and there are people who conduct violence. And I think that my father was conducting violence, and you can have different levels, but still.
It's about violence, but it's also about, in the, I'd say, first half of the book, you describe a lot of moments where you discover the other side of your father, where you discover that you discover photos where he was wearing the costume of a majorette, so female costume. You were discovering that he was crying in front of television, watching an opera. So in a way, you're portraying him also with a lot of in a cliche like way we would say feminine aspects to his. Could you talk a little bit about this? Is there any link, maybe? I mean, psychologically, people would say that there is maybe also in his body a feminine side which he refused to accept. Not saying that he might also be a homosexual, but there are parts in his character who are close to this. Would you say this?
Yeah, because like this is one of the scenes of the book. When I was a child, I would often stay in my bedroom, and I would put Céline Dion on, and I would invent choreographies and do it all day long, just trying to get my choreography better and better. I was very focused, and it was very intense. I was doing it very often, and I love dancing, and I'm so sad not to be a dancer every day. That's the dreams that I never achieved. And
I always thought you wanted to become a director one day. That's what you told me.
Of course.
Everything.
But I want to try every single life. I want to have all the lives in my life, of course. But no, I hadn't. I was particularly interested in dancing, and so I was doing that every Saturday, every Sunday, every Wednesday afternoon, just putting alone the music in my room that I was sharing with my brother and sister, but they would be out with their friends. And one day my mother caught me dancing, and she told me, I thought that she was going to tell me, this is so effeminate to dance, but she tells me, oh, you dance exactly like your father. And I remember that it was quite a shock for me, you know, to know that my father had danced one day in her life. So I was maybe 13.
And as you describe it in the book, your mother was very proud of your father, that he was such a great dancer.
She told me, oh, you know, your father was always dancing, and I was so proud of him because he had such a beautiful way of dancing and such a beautiful body language. And as soon as we would go to the club, your father was dancing, and I was like this because I was so proud that he was my man, and I was so proud to have a man who was such a good dancer. And I remember that really it was such a shock for me to know that my father could have done anything so free, so incompatible with his obsession with masculinity. And I had many moments like that in my life where I realized that they are coming. Didier?
We were just talking about you, Didier. We were just talking. On vient de parler de toi, Didier. Bonsoir.
It was a surprise for you, Thomas.
I am surprised because you told me there are two friends coming. We have to keep a seat for the two friends.
And we decided not to tell you before. And
what a beautiful surprise.
And so there was it's something, you know, that I realized one day where, in fact, I wrote Das Ende von Eddie about my childhood and my relationship to my family during my childhood. And in doing so, I didn't realize that in the book I wrote several times in the book that my father was crying, you know, that my father was crying quite often, you know. And when I was a child, my father would always say, a man should never cry. But in fact, I opened the book, and suddenly I thought, oh my God, but in fact my father was crying all the time. He was always crying, you know. And he would say only women cry. But if I think it through and if I think about it, I realize that my mother would never cry when I was a child. She cried 1 or 2 times in my whole childhood. And my father was crying 1 or 2 times a week, you know. And so my question, c'est vrai. And so I was wondering, like, how is it possible that a norm is so strong even if nobody respects it, you know? And how is it possible for a norm, for a social norm, to cross history, to cross generations, and even if, like, people don't respect that norm, they respect it and it affects their life in a way, of course. And my father was, in fact, performing masculinity again and again, and it destroyed him at many regards. But still, there were so many things like this, so many moments where I thought, like, how is it possible that this norm is still here and nobody is like undoing it? Maybe because people don't know about it. So that's why at some point in Who Killed My Father, I said, I talk to my father and I tell him, you know, I cry too, and I cried often and I cry a lot, and because maybe my father thought that he was the only person crying, you know, he was the only man crying.
Would you go that far that you would share the opinion that he was only performing masculinity without wanting it? Is it the social world who forced him to perform masculinity, but in fact he was more a feminine character? Yeah, there's also this other very beautiful moment where you ask your mother, why did you fall in love with my father? And now you can go on and tell the story.
I asked my mother one day how she fell in love with my father and why she fell in love with him, and she told me, oh, because of the fragrance, because he was wearing perfume. And he was the only man to wear perfume, you know. At that time, in the 80s, men would never wear fragrance, you know. But your father, yes, he did.
Oh, I did.
I know, that's why.
I have the same age as your father, and to be mentioned.
No, but I know that precisely some men would do that. But my father, there was this. there was this masculinity. No, of course he was enjoying it because he was enjoying the privilege of that, you know. He was so happy to go to the cafe everywhere, never telling to my mom when he would come home, and my mother was waiting because if she wasn't waiting, it would end up like a crisis, and he would tell, why didn't you wait for me before dinner? And he was enjoying never cleaning the house, and so he was enjoying a lot of privileges, of course, but there is also the destruction that masculinity imported in his own life. And I say in the book, for example, that for my father, and so for someone like him in general in this milieu and in my childhood, to perform his masculinity, to show that he was masculine, he had to leave school as young as possible, you know, because to refuse, to reject the school system, to disobey the teachers, to eventually insult the teacher was a kind of evidence of a masculinity.
Or to even beat the teacher, what you describe in the book, that one of your relatives...
One of my cousins, yeah, even me when I was a child, when I was at school, like one day there was a guy who slapped one of the teacher, and he was a kind of a hero of masculinity in the middle school, because even the professor was scared of him, you know. He was a child, he was 13, and adults were scared of him, you know. And so there was something so ingrained and with masculinity, and frankly I wonder more and more if this question of masculinity and of sexuality and of homophobia, because of course it's linked, the rejection of everything that appears and sounds feminine. I wonder if it's not even more powerful to understand the life of my father, but also the class system and the way inequality works and everything, because everything, and Geoffroy was here, wrote one day a very beautiful article about it, a very beautiful piece about it. Every single class issue in my family and in the middle of my childhood was always a gender issue, you know. It was to eat big food and not a small food like the effeminate bourgeoisie, you know, who pay a lot of money just to have a small thing in their plate. It was to refuse to cross the legs like the feminine men from the bourgeoisie. And like so, the construction, the self-construction of the working class identity was always a rejection of what appeared to be the femininity of the bourgeoisie. And I said that in Das Ende von Eddie when I went to the high school, and I was the first person in my family to go to high school. I went there, and I was seeing boys kissing each other on the cheeks, and like in the village where I grew up, it was impossible to imagine. And I remember I thought like, oh, they are all gay, in fact, you know, or Either they are all gay, or I was never gay. I was just born a bourgeois, and I was trapped in a working class body, you know. But I was so shocked, because a man would never kiss someone, and it was a feminine, and therefore it was a way of building one's class identity. And I'm sure that like if our societies were fighting stronger against masculine domination and homophobia, it would affect, in a way, of course not completely, but it would affect deeply social reproduction and social norms and social behaviors and everything, because it was so central. And we know, like, because like some sociologists worked on it, and even Didier already talked about it in Insult and the Making of the Gay Self. When you come from, sociologically, if you come from a working class milieu, your chance of going to school, studying and everything increase a lot if you are a gay person. Or if you are a woman, you know, because you are not trapped in this stupidity and in this violence.
Performing
norms.
Masculinity.
Yeah, at another level, Assa Traoré in France, who created the Comité Adama, who fight against police violence towards younger black and Arab people, some are gay. When she talks, she says that the fate and the destiny of a black person in France or an Arab in France, it's very, very different if you are a woman or if you are a man, you know, and women are much safer, they study much more often, they get to create their own life much more often and everything. And so I really believe that if we want to recreate a new Marxist analysis of neo-Marxist, post-Marxist, a left-wing Bourdieusian analysis of social world and its way of working. The issue of masculinity and homophobia has to play a very, very important role, you know, and we can't redefine today Marxism without talking about these things because they are so deep. Yeah.
I want to read a short paragraph, and maybe you could read it after in French. Seltsam, weil dein Vater gewalttätig war, sagtest du immer wieder, wie besessen, du würdest nie gewalttätig werden. Würdest nie eines deiner Kinder schlagen. Du sagtest zu uns, nie im Leben werde ich die Hand gegen eines meiner Kinder erheben. Gewalt produziert nicht nur Gewalt. Lange habe ich immer wieder gesagt, Gewalt bewirke Gewalt. Aber da habe ich mich geirrt. Die Gewalt hat uns vor der Gewalt bewahrt.
C'est étrange. Parce que ton père était violent, tu répétais obsessionnellement que tu ne serais jamais violent, que tu ne frapperais jamais aucun de tes enfants. Tu nous disais, je ne poserai jamais la main sur un de mes enfants, jamais de ma vie. La violence ne produit pas que de la violence. J'ai répété cette phrase longtemps, que la violence est cause de la violence. Je me suis trompé. La violence nous avait sauvés de la violence.
There's nothing to say about it. Is it? I think we would make it smaller if we would interpret it. Because we're in Berlin, I want to read this. 2004. Auf der Schule höre ich zum ersten Mal etwas über den Kalten Krieg, die deutsche Teilung, die Berliner Mauer und dann vom Fall der Mauer. Die Tatsache, dass bei uns in Europa eine Großstadt von heute auf morgen durch eine Mauer in 2 Teile geteilt werden konnte, hatte auf mich eine enorm beeindruckende Wirkung. Ich war völlig fasziniert. Den restlichen Tag überhörte ich nicht mehr, was um mich herum gesagt wurde. Ich konnte nur noch dran denken, konnte nichts anderes tun. Ich versuchte mir vorzustellen, wie diese Mauer mitten auf einer Straße gebaut wurde, über die noch tags zuvor Menschen gingen, ohne an etwas dergleichen auch nur zu denken. Du warst beim Fall der Mauer schon über 20 und ich ersann den ganzen Tag lang Fragen, die ich dir stellen wollte. Kanntest du jemanden, der die Mauer noch gesehen hatte, Menschen, die sie berührt, die an ihrer Zerstörung mitgewirkt hatten? Wie war das, dieses zweigeteilte Europa? Erzähl mir das, diese Betonmauer zwischen 2 Europas. Ich stieg auf dem Dorfplatz aus dem Schulbus und entgegen meiner sonstigen Gewohnheit trödelte ich nicht, um so langsam wie möglich nach Hause zu gelangen. Ich hoffte nicht, dein Auto nicht auf dem Bürgersteig zu sehen, sondern ich rannte, was meine Beine hergaben, den Kopf voller Fragen. Ich fragte dich alles, was ich vorbereitet hatte, was ich in meinem Kopf angehäuft hatte. Aber du antwortest nur ausweichend. Ach ja, stimmt, ja, da war diese Mauer, habe ich im Fernsehen gesehen. Mehr nicht. Ich wartete, aber du drehtest mir den Rücken zu. Ich fasste nach. Aber wie war es denn? Wie hat die Mauer ausgesehen? Und wenn jemand, den man lieb hatte, auf der anderen Seite wohnte, hat man denn den nie wieder gesehen? Nie wieder? Du wusstest nichts darauf zu erwidern. Ich erkannte allmählich, dass mein Beharren dich schmerzte. Ich war 12, aber ich benutzte Wörter, die du nicht verstehen konntest. Trotzdem ließ ich immer noch nicht locker. Du wurdest wütend und schriest, ich sollte endlich mit der Fragerei aufhören. Aber es war eine andere Wut als sonst, kein normales Geschrei. Du schämtest dich, weil ich dich mit der Welt der Schule konfrontierte, die du nicht kennengelernt hattest, die nichts von dir hatte wissen wollen. Wo ist die Geschichte? Die Geschichte, die in der Schule gelehrt wurde, war nicht deine Geschichte. Uns wurde die Weltgeschichte beigebracht. Du wurdest von der Welt auf Abstand gehalten.
2004. Au collège, j'entends parler pour la première fois de la guerre froide, de la division de l'Allemagne en deux, de Berlin, séparée par un mur, puis de la chute de ce mur. Le fait qu'une grande ville, aussi proche de nous, ait pu être divisée presque du jour au lendemain en 2 parties par un mur, a eu l'effet d'une tempête sur moi. J'étais fasciné. Toute la journée, je n'ai plus écouté ce qu'on me disait, je ne pensais plus qu'à ça, je n'étais plus capable d'autre chose. J'essayais d'imaginer le mur posé au milieu d'une route que le jour d'avant des femmes et des hommes pouvaient traverser sans réfléchir. Tu avais déjà plus de 20 ans quand le mur a été détruit. Alors j'ai fantasmé tout le temps que la journée a duré les questions que j'allais te poser. Est-ce que tu connaissais des personnes qui avaient vu le mur? Des hommes ou des femmes qui l'avaient touché, qui avaient participé à sa destruction? Qu'est-ce que c'était, cette Europe divisée en deux? Dis-moi, ce mur de ciment entre deux Europes. Le bus qui me ramenait à la maison m'a déposé sur la place du village. Mais contrairement à d'habitude, je ne suis pas rentré le plus lentement possible en traînant dans la rue. Je n'ai pas prié pour que ta voiture ne soit pas sur le trottoir. J'ai couru. J'ai couru plus vite que jamais, la tête pleine de toutes mes questions. Je t'ai demandé ce qui s'était accumulé dans ma tête et tu m'as répondu vaguement « Oui, oui, c'est vrai, il y avait un mur. Ils en parlaient à la télé. » C'est tout ce que tu m'as dit. J'ai attendu, mais tu m'as tourné le dos. J'ai insisté. Mais dis-moi, comment c'était? Qu'est-ce que c'était? À quoi ressemblait le mur? Est-ce que si la personne qu'on aimait habitait de l'autre côté du mur, on ne pouvait plus jamais la voir? Plus jamais? Tu n'avais rien à dire. J'ai commencé à voir que mon insistance te faisait mal. J'avais 12 ans, mais je disais des mots que tu ne comprenais pas. J'ai quand même insisté un peu plus et tu t'es énervé. Tu as crié. Tu m'as dit de ne plus te poser de questions. Mais tu n'étais pas énervé comme d'habitude. Ce n'était pas un cri normal. Tu avais honte parce que je te confrontais à la culture scolaire, celle qui t'avait exclu, qui n'avait pas voulu de toi. Où est l'histoire? L'histoire qu'on nous enseignait à l'école n'était pas ton histoire à toi. On nous apprenait l'histoire du monde et tu étais tenu à l'écart du monde.
Actually, it's not really about Berlin, but anyway, I thought it's a nice piece here. Okay, I will read one more, then we talk a little bit again. Noch ein Bild. That is out of a practical reason why I want to read this. You will understand why. It's about the sea. Noch ein Bild. Du fährst, ich sitze hinter dir auf der Rückbank, wir sind allein im Auto und du sagst, so, jetzt fahren wir gleich übers Wasser. Ich weiß nicht, was das bedeuten soll, ich habe den Ausdruck noch nie gehört. Du wiederholst, jetzt fahren wir gleich übers Wasser. Du rast auf das Meer zu. Das Wasser nähert sich, ich denke, du willst uns umbringen. Du willst sterben und ich soll mit dir sterben. Ich schreie, nein Papa, nein, bitte nicht. Ich kneife die Augen zu, ich will nicht sterben. Du schießt weiter drauf zu und am Saum des Wassers reißt du das Lenkrad herum mit einem einzigen Ruck. Jetzt fährst du nicht mehr ins Wasser hinein, sondern parallel dazu. 2 Räder auf dem Sand, die beiden anderen im Wasser. Das Auto fährt teilweise durch das Wasser, 20, vielleicht 30 Zentimeter tief. Ich rutsche auf der Rückbank hinüber, schaue auf der Wasserseite durchs Fenster und tatsächlich, ich sehe nur noch das Meer und ein Auto, das übers Wasser fährt auf der Oberfläche. Sonst gibt es nichts mehr. Du sagst, siehst du, was habe ich gesagt? Wir fahren übers Wasser.
Une autre image. Tu conduis, je suis sur la banquette derrière toi, il n'y a que nous et tu dis, on va rouler sur les vagues. Je ne sais pas ce que ça veut dire, je n'avais jamais entendu l'expression. Tu dis encore, on va rouler sur les vagues et tu fonces vers la mer. Tu roules sur le sable et la mer s'approche. Les vagues avancent vers nous. Je pense que tu vas nous tuer, que tu veux mourir et que tu veux que je meure avec toi. Je crie « Non, papa, non, s'il te plaît. » Je ferme les yeux, je ne veux pas mourir. Tu approches encore et au bord de l'eau, tu tournes le volant d'un coup simple et bref. Et tu roules non plus vers l'intérieur des vagues, mais parallèlement à elles. 2 roues sur le sable et 2 autres dans l'eau. Ta voiture en partie immergée d'une vingtaine, peut-être 30 cm. Je me déplace vers la banquette, je regarde à travers la vitre du côté de l'eau. Et c'est vrai, je ne vois que la mer et ta voiture qui roule dessus, à sa surface. Il n'y a rien d'autre. Tu me répètes, tu vois, je te l'avais dit, on roule sur les vagues.
Yeah, first of all, it's more beautiful in French, that's for sure. So please read it in French. Or you read it and you make a recording and then people can listen to it. Did you ever think about recording it?
I did it, in fact, but I regret, but I did it. I think I'm not such a good reader.
But
so
just now you were brilliant.
No, anyway.
The reason why I wanted to talk about this is how is it possible?
this thing.
It's a very simple, basic car driver question. This is possible?
Oh yes, it's possible. It was my father knows a lot of things that you don't know how to do. I'm sorry for you.
What kind of car is it? Was it?
I'm gay, so I don't know. I don't know.
That's a cliché, Édouard.
I don't know cars. I don't know. I think it was a big car.
Which color?
Well, it was white, and it was. I remember that we called it a break because it was a very long. Because we had a lot of dogs, and we would put the dogs in the back of the car. And but it was something, like the sand in the north of France is very often not soft because it's raining all the time, and so because it's raining, the sand is full of water, so the sand is quite hard, so you can quite easily take your car on the sand. And so my father did that one day. He just told me, we are going to rouler sur les vagues, and it was on the sand because the sand once again was very hard, and the north is very beautiful for that because you have the sea and it's raining on the sea, and it's quite beautiful, and my father did that. But like this kind of things that my father would do, it's there were so many things that he was able to do, and so many things that he wanted to do, and so many things that he wanted to be, but it was precisely for him impossible to become that other part of him, because he was trapped in his life. So sometimes it was as if he built a jail for his own body, and from time to time, like there was a harm coming and saying, I want to be someone else, which is it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that I forget what happened around that, like when I think about my mother, I'm writing a book in which she plays a role today, and when I think about it, my mother, my father completely ruined her life. Recently, I saw my mother, and she gave me a picture of her, and it was a picture, and on the picture she was maybe like 18 or 19 years old. And when I saw the picture, I was so shocked because she seemed so beautiful and so free and so, emancipated, and she's smiling and she's taking a selfie in the 80s, so it was not the fashion thing yet. And she was doing this thing. And I remember when I saw that photo, it made me so angry against my father, because I thought about like the 20 years of her life that he ruined for her, like she wanted to wear makeup and he didn't want her to wear makeup because he was saying that makeup was for sluts. She wanted to work and he would say that it's her place to stay home. And she was telling that to me all the time when I was a child. She was telling me like, why is your father destroying my life like that? Why does he feel the need to humiliate me? I recounted this scene at the Freie Universität last year at the talk. One day there was a little celebration in the village, like there are quite often in villages, like some parties and people eat couscous together or everything. And my father was there and my mother was there, and there were like 200, 300 people, a lot of people from the village. And my father said to my mother, hey, fat cow, come here. And this is one of the only time in my childhood that I saw my mother crying, because he called her fat cow in front of like 300 people, and everyone was laughing. And my mother went home and she was crying in the sofa. And she said like, why does he need to humiliate me like that? And so I know that he was that person too, and for me it's very important not to be naive when I talk about him. He also did that, and he was with my mother between her 25 and her 45, and these 20 years of her life were destroyed by him, so his behavior was due to social structure, to history, but still it happened. So when I talk about him, I'm not.
So it's
blind.
not 100% forgiveness.
Yes, I forgive, but forgiving doesn't mean that it's not a problem. Precisely, you know, as Jacques Derrida would say, if you forgive, it's only if it's unforgivable, you know. Because if you forgive something that it's forgivable, it's nothing. Yeah. There is not the effort. There is not the additional thing, you know. And so that's a very beautiful idea from Derrida, that you can only forgive what is impardonable, unforgivable. And so I forgive my father because I know that what he did is unforgivable, you know. And I will never forget it, you know. And also that's a very banal story, but as a lot of gay people, when I was 8 or 9 years old, like the idea of killing myself, of committing a suicide and everything, like, was an obsession, you know. And today I know that it's not normal. I don't want to have a childhood in which I was obsessed with dying, you know. That's not normal, and that's unforgivable from my father. And I say that I'm perfectly happy today, you know. I'm not a traumatized person, but so yeah, I think that I forgive him because precisely I think that it's impossible to forget what he was and what he did.
So the core of the text, I'd say, is in the last third, where you kind of answer this question, Qui a tué mon père? Who killed my father? We will not read this because otherwise people will not buy the book. So there's a solution to it. I think everybody who heard about the book knows what's it about. And who did it, or what is the explanation of Édouard. But we will read after this, or I will read first, and try to make a link to what would be our last issue in the first talk we are having here, because there might be a link. Du hast dich in den letzten Jahren verändert. Du bist ein anderer geworden. Wir haben uns unterhalten lange, wir haben uns ausgesprochen. Ich habe dir Vorwürfe gemacht wegen des Menschen, der du in meiner Kindheit warst, für deine Härte, dein Schweigen, für die Situation, die ich hier schildere, und du hast zugehört und ich habe dir zugehört. Du, der du dein Leben lang darauf herumgeritten bist, an den Problemen Frankreichs seien die Ausländer und die Homosexuellen schuld. Du kritisierst jetzt den in Frankreich herrschenden Rassismus. Du bittest mich, dir von dem Mann zu erzählen, den ich liebe. Du kaufst meine Bücher, du verschenkst sie nach links und nach rechts. Du hast dich von einem Tag auf den anderen verändert. Einer meiner Freunde sagt, die Kinder würden die Eltern verändern, nicht andersrum. Aber das, was sie deinem Körper angetan haben, hindert dich daran, den Menschen zu entdecken, der du geworden bist. Letzten Monat fragtest du mich, als ich nach meinem Besuch bei dir aufbrechen wollte, machst du immer noch Politik? Das immer noch bezog sich auf mein erstes Jahr im Gymnasium, als ich mich einer extrem linken Gruppierung angeschlossen hatte. Und wir uns stritten, denn du hattest Angst, ich könnte Ärger mit der Justiz bekommen, weil ich an so vielen nicht genehmigten Demonstrationen teilnahm. Ich antwortete, ja, jetzt mehr denn je. Du ließest 3-4 Sekunden verstreichen, du schautest mich an, dann sagtest du, recht so. Ich glaube, was es bräuchte, ist eine ordentliche Revolution.
Tu as changé ces dernières années. Tu es devenu quelqu'un d'autre. Nous nous sommes parlé longtemps. Nous nous sommes expliqués. Je t'ai reproché la personne que tu as été quand j'étais enfant, ta dureté, ton silence, ces scènes que j'énumère depuis tout à l'heure, et tu m'as écouté. Et je t'ai écouté. Toi qui toute ta vie as répété que le problème de la France venait des étrangers et des homosexuels, tu critiques maintenant le racisme de la France. Tu me demandes de te parler de l'homme que j'aime. Tu achètes les livres que je publie. Tu les offres aux gens autour de toi. Tu as changé du jour au lendemain. Un de mes amis dit que ce sont les enfants qui transforment leurs parents et pas le contraire. En fait, c'est Didier Geoffroy qui dit ça. Mais ce qu'ils ont fait de ton corps ne te donne pas la possibilité de découvrir la personne que tu es devenue. Le mois dernier, quand je suis venu te voir, avant que je parte, tu m'as demandé « Tu fais encore de la politique ?» Je t'ai dit « Oui, de plus en plus ». Tu as laissé passer 3 ou 4 secondes, tu m'as regardé et enfin tu as dit « Tu as raison. Tu as raison, je crois qu'il faudrait une bonne révolution. »
So now we cannot not talk about it, because everybody who is now approaching Didier, Geoffroy, Édouard, sometimes even myself when I'm in France and have the chance to be with these guys, and there are a lot of journalists, and it's always, especially when it comes to German journalists, it's always about what is it with the Gilets jaunes. So even Juliette Binoche in Der Spiegel. I didn't hear about this, but I'm happy. So I will read one part of an article which was first published in Les Incorruptibles in France, and then
which was first published on my Instagram account,
which was first
and
published
Twitter account.
in your Instagram and Twitter account, and then later also in Germany in Die Zeit. Als ich die ersten Bilder der Gelbwesten sah, empfand ich einen Schock, der schwer zu beschreiben ist. Auf den Fotos zu den vielen Artikeln sah man Körper, die im medialen und öffentlichen Raum fast immer unsichtbar bleiben, leidende Körper. Körper, die von der Müdigkeit und der Arbeit, vom Hunger, von der andauernden Demütigung durch die Herrschenden verwüstet sind, die gezeichnet sind von räumlicher und sozialer Ausgrenzung. Ich blickte in ausgemergelte Gesichter, sah gebeugte, gebrochene Menschen, schaute auf erschöpfte Hände. Warum gehen mir diese Bilder so nah? Sicher, ich verabscheue die Gewalt der sozialen Welt, ihre Ungleichheit. Doch das ist nicht der einzige Grund. Die Körper der Menschen, die man auf diesen Fotos sieht, ähneln demjenigen meines Vaters, meines Bruders, meiner Tante. Sie ähneln den Körpern meiner Familie und der Menschen aus dem Dorf, in dem ich aufgewachsen bin. Von diesen Menschen, deren Gesundheit von Elend und Armut ruiniert ist, hörte ich immer wieder meine ganze Kindheit lang. Auf uns zählt niemand, von uns spricht niemand. Deshalb fühle ich mich persönlich getroffen von der Verachtung und der Gewalt, mit der die bürgerlichen Klassen dieser Bewegung sofort begegnet sind. In mir, für mich war es so. Jeder, der eine gelbe Weste beleidigte, beleidigte meinen Vater. I think we should stop after 1 hour, don't we? Yeah. You were just saying in an interview to the radio that the book is not kind of pamphlet or manifesto of the Gilets jaunes, but it comes now. You know, you wrote it 1 year before, and all of a sudden there is this connection to what you describe in the book and what's happening in the street, and that's why also I choose the last chapter where your father says what we need is a revolution. Could you comment on this?
Yeah, you know, I don't know if like whether I am a prophet or just a very unlucky guy, but when I published Das Ende von Eddie, there was the gay marriage, and everyone was like 6 months after the book was published, and everyone was asking, you know, I published Herzen der Gewalt, there was the Me Too movement, and so everyone was asking me like 6 months after the book, and now I published this book, and 6 months after there is the Yellow Vest movement, and so it's quite difficult for me because I am in a situation where I comment the actuality, even if I wrote these stories long time before, because if it's published 6 months before, it means that I finished the book more than 1 year before, so it's always very strange. But yeah, it's true that when even me, like when I saw the first pictures from the Gilets jaunes movement, I was not in France at that moment. I was in the United States, and Didier and Geoffroy were sending me articles and everything, and I started to see the pictures, and of course I immediately thought about my father and people of my family, because I would see visually the pain that I knew in my childhood, this kind of physical pain, this kind of dispossession, poverty, extreme precarity, and the way that it affects bodies, the way it affects the way people talk, the way they move, the way they interact with each other. And when I saw that, I was so moved, I was bouleversé, vraiment. because it was the kind of bodies that I would never see, really never see in the public sphere, and I wrote my books precisely as a revenge against this kind of invisibility of the body, of the voices, of the discourses, of the faces, because as I often say also, it's the working class are not invisible as such, because in the mouth of the ruling classes and in the mouth of the governments, there are a lot of speeches about poor people. In fact, they are quite obsessed. There is in the field of speech, there is a kind of obsession towards the working class to always talk about them. They should be more responsible. They should work hard. Our nation needs more work. How we have to take the welfare from them so they don't get too lazy and so they get back to work and everything. And so, in fact, the working classes or post-working class or non-working class or popular classes or poor people are overrepresented in the field of speech, but it's through insult, and it's never through their bodies, never through what they have to say, never through their words. And so that's why I wanted me coming from this milieu, I wanted to write in order to give a visibility which would be something else than insult, and
also to talk about the connection between concrete politics and what it means to a certain class, because this is the whole point, or one of the major points of the book, that minor so-called reforms, which are in the end cuts, minor cuts to social programs means major issues for these families.
Yeah, it's because when I started to write about my father and his history and his being and his body, I thought that it was impossible to write about his story without mentioning politics, because his body was so directly affected by politics. And I remember being a child at 12 years old and coming home, and there was a new legislation by Sarkozy or by Chirac, and I remember that it was threatening, like physically for my father. It was threatening. He was scared. Okay, so I'm not going to be able to buy this medicine anymore, and so I will suffer the most intimate thing, the physical pain, because of the decision made by this person. In France, where you are president, you are elected, then you choose your prime minister, you create your government. These people were choosing and deciding to smash poor people, They made these decisions. And it's true that when I say it in the book at some point, the more you belong to a privileged milieu and the least you are affected by politics, because as soon as you have money, when you have diplomas, when you have education, when you have friends, when you know people, when you live in a big city, you are less affected by politics. You are kind of, except in particular historical moments, but you are kind of protected from politics, And I hate Macron, but he cannot kill me. But he can kill a migrant, And there are migrants dying in the Mediterranean. There are migrants dying in the French Alps, because this guy has the power to say, I welcome 1 million migrants, And don't say that it's more complicated than that, because people always say that. And we proved historically that it's a lie, that it's wrong, Angela Merkel, that I don't love particularly, she said we are going to welcome several 100,000 of migrants, and so there is a kind of victimism from the dominant class, who is always saying, I wish I could do more, but I can't, One of the person who shows that he can do many things that people considered impossible before, it's unfortunately Trump, He doesn't play the rule of the political world anymore, So he's giving a lesson to left-wing people who are always, I wish I could do more, but I can't. Yes, they can. They have the power to make this decision. And for a migrant who is dying in the sea, who is dying in the French Alps, this decision of not doing anything by one of the only person in France, you can create an association, you can illegally help people and everything, but him alone, he could welcome thousands, hundreds of thousands of migrants, and he does not. And so these people are dying. And what is more personal than dying, than losing your body, than losing your life, than not being able to drink anymore, to live your life anymore, to have sex anymore, to kiss someone anymore, And It was very strange, because I wrote Herzen der Gewalt, which talk about sexual assault, and I tried to understand what created the sexual assault, like did it happen, and it didn't mean that it's not a problem, but it meant that I wanted to understand because it's a problem. It's more than a problem. And I remember that when I did that, a lot of people in France, representatives from the dominant class, people in the media, were telling me, but you are trying to explain what happened, but he's responsible personally for what he did. It's very dangerous to pretend that he is not personally responsible. And the same people, 2 years after, when I published Who Killed My Father, talking about what Macron, what Sarkozy, what Chirac did to my father, they became like the biggest sociologists in the world. They say, oh no, it's more complicated than that. It's like social structures. It's very difficult for them and everything. And so the same people fighting against the very possibility of understanding even the worst and the most awful behavior when it comes to dominant class, they want to create a sociological, and I think that it's, in addition to that, it's precisely the opposite. I think that the more you are dominant and the more you are responsible for what you do and for what you are, because you have access to the world, you have access to culture, you have access to books, you have access to travel, you have access to other realities, to other life. My father was stuck in the village for his whole life, in the same region. He never crossed the border. When I was a child, we thought that the grocery store owner was a bourgeoise. We thought that she was so rich and she was as poor as us, but our vision and our perception of the world was so restrained by the place we were living in, that our judgments were wrong. But when you have money, when you have ability to know, to see, to act, and you don't do, you are more responsible than others. So philosophically, we can't talk about responsibility as a concept like this without knowing for who you are talking about. Responsibility is not the same concept when it comes to my father and when it comes to Macron, And so what I wanted to show in the book is that this decision made by these people to make new decisions that affect the body of my father, for my father it's personal. It's as personal as his first kiss, is as personal. Politics for him is as personal as the first time he had sex with someone, as the times he was dancing and my mother was proud of him. Politics is just this part of his body, When you once again, when you have migrants telling my brother died or my sister died in the Mediterranean, okay, so if Macron said, okay, we welcome 1 million people, these people wouldn't be in this situation. How dare people still support Macron, even when I come to Germany and I listen to them and they say good thing about this guy. Maybe they don't have a problem because it's people of color who are dying in the sea. Maybe if it was German or French people who were dying, they would hate Macron. But now people are dying and they say, oh, but he's still a good guy. Okay, so they have to be honest. They have to say, we don't care if people of color are dying. They have to be honest about it, And that makes me so outrageous because everyone knows it, Everyone knows it. And people are all the time denying what is going on. And you tell them, no, wait, he refuses to welcome people. People are dying. And you dare telling me he's still a good guy, For someone whose mother died in the Mediterranean, you will tell her he's still a good guy? That just, I'm sorry, I'm upset suddenly, but it's so important to be upset, I can't bear these people who are never upset, We have to be upset. It's not normal what is going on, And so that's just intimacy, that's just reality, that's just truth, And I wrote Who Killed My Father because I wanted people to be upset. I don't want them to still think that it's normal, that we live in a normal world. We don't live in a normal world. We live in a world that's completely fucked up. There is a huge issue. Yeah, well, and so, yeah, it's...
That's a nice way to finish.
Ja, das war der fulminante erste Teil unseres Abends. Vielen, vielen Dank, Thomas, vielen Dank, Édouard, für die erste Stunde. Wenn Sie Freunden von diesem Abend erzählen wollen und wollen das live dokumentieren, in den nächsten Geistesblüten in der Frühjahrsausgabe wird es eine Mitschrift dieses Gesprächs geben und natürlich auch des zweiten dann, weil Sie sind sicher interessiert, wie es hier weitergeht. Und da würden wir uns natürlich freuen, wenn wir uns hier wiedersehen. Vielen, vielen Dank, dass Sie heute Abend unsere Gäste waren. Bücher gibt es bei mir hier vorne am Büchertisch. Édouard wird hier bleiben und ich hoffe, dass wir uns ganz bald wiedersehen und fühlen Sie sich jetzt bitte nicht hinausgeworfen. Danke. Schönen Abend. Schön, dass Sie hier waren.